Hey guys, so today this is going to be a different kind of video. My name is Noah with Simple Betterment, and today I'm going to be talking about a lifelong battle I've kind of always had with anxiety. So, I am a social work major right now, and I'm studying to become a therapist, and I want to work on trauma and addiction with teens and adolescents. And I just kind of want to share my story and what's kind of, propelled me into that thought process so that I can maybe share some hope for some of y'all out there and kind of give you a background on why I think mental health is so important. I talked about in my first video that I really wanted to focus on a health aspect of, this channel, talking about, nutrition, your mental health, and working out, exercising. I've done a lot of the working out and exercising. I've done a little bit of nutrition. I have yet to do mental health. So this is going to be my first mental health video. And I hope you guys like it. But without further ado, I'm just going to get into my story. So, starting about when I was 12 years old, was when I first realized that I had anxiety or some sort of mental health struggle, but I didn't really know what it was. Um, I had moved to a new school and I was not used to anyone there. I didn't have anyone for any new friends really because I had just started at the school, and my parents were kind of going through a different time in their lives. My dad had just started to get a stable job. My mom had started a new job, and we were trying to figure out finances since my parents had both had a job, and I was going to grow up. They wanted to move me to a better area of town so that I could go to a better intermediate school. So starting there, I had made a couple friends, and when I say couple, I mean like literally I had like two friends, and those two friends were probably um, pretty close. They're pretty close to me, and they're probably what really helped me the most in these trying times. But I just all of a sudden got really anxious, and I didn't really trust my parents, and I had developed this kind of fear towards chemicals or germs, but not like average germs. So, for example, the main things that um, I was afraid of were gasoline, bleach, and any sort of like cleaning material, whether it be Windex, window cleaner, um, bathroom cleaner, kitchen cleaner, and also raw chicken specifically, raw meat in general, but chicken was like the main one. I don't really know why that happened to me or what caused it, but I had just like had this newfound fear that I was going to touch a counter and that counter was going to have had raw chicken on it, right? It was going to be an uncleaned counter with raw chicken on it. And if I had touched that unclean counter with raw chicken, then that raw chicken would be on my hands. And whenever I touched the doorknob, then it would become on that doorknob. And then whenever someone else touched that doorknob, it would then get on their hands. And then if they touched their mouth, then they would get raw chicken in their mouth. And I had somehow at age 12 decided that this is how I thought illness was, transmitted. And it's like partly true that that's how illness is transmitted, but I mean, I was way over exaggerating it, and I was thinking super crazily, and I was super anxious about my health, and I was super anxious about hurting myself or hurting others accidentally. Well, this is the first time that I had really experienced anything like this, and my parents had really experienced anything like this, and so they kind of freaked out, didn't really know how to handle it. Um, they got, kind of aggressive at me. They would kind of yell at me and be like, I don't really understand why you're dealing with this. I don't really understand how to handle it. And I started acting out as well. So that made it worse for them. They felt like they had to punish me and things like that because I was disobeying them. Well, we went to a therapist. The therapist kind of got me sorted out, like listen to me, talk to me, help my parents adjust to be a little more understanding and a little less aggressive. And that helped out quite a bit. I didn't really have the issues anymore once I got into, the next year. I was probably about 12 years old. So when I was about 13, I didn't really have those issues very much. And I had like no fears of germs, no crazy spiral thoughts like that. And so I was doing quite a bit better. And I didn't realize that I had, anxiety at that point, but it would pop up. I'd get tests and I'd study for them. I'd try really hard, and then I would get to the test and I'd zone out and I wouldn't really understand what I'm doing. I wouldn't really pay attention. I don't really remember most of the tests, but it would turn out that I would do really good. I would do fine most of the time, and a lot of times I thought I was doing bad, and it turns out I wasn't really doing that bad. And I just didn't really realize why I was thinking that. I didn't realize that I was just super anxious all the time. I just thought that's kind of everyone thought. And then, as I grew up, started, dating girls and stuff like that, I would get really anxious. I would think, oh, like maybe what do I do? This girl doesn't like me. I don't know how to handle rejection. It's a new thing I've never, handled before. Or like, oh, I don't want to break up with this girl because what if she's the girl I'm supposed to marry? And then I ruined everything and my life is over. Like I would just get these crazy thoughts like this. And for me personally, I leaned into religion. My family was very Christian, and growing up, I believed into that. And then when I got older, I paid attention more to Christianity and found my own way, a little separate of my parents. And that really helped me out in those tough and trying times. But from about 13 years old, well, really until now, I haven't had therapy. Haven't gone back to a therapist very consistently. I haven't had like a therapy session. I did visit a psychiatrist once. But going through high school, it increasingly got worse. Like I would worry about my tests. I would worry about, if people weren't texting me back, why aren't they texting me back? It would first start with like, do they hate me? Do they not care about me anymore? Blah blah blah. And then if I felt pretty secure in those things, it would be like, what if they're dead? What if somebody kidnapped them? What if they got murdered? Like I would just start having these wild overthinking episodes and just these crazy things. I would go on, and I kept leaning into the Christianity. I had kept, you know, going to church, going to all the church events. I was like reading my Bible every day. I was praying every day. And like at 15, I didn't know a lot of people that did that, right? And so throughout like 15 and 16 years old, like I would consistently do that and pay attention to those kind of things until my grandfather, he got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. And so for probably, say the course like 4 or 5 months, somewhere in between there, I found out he had stage 4 lung cancer, and I would just pray every night, like, Lord, please don't take my grandfather. Please don't let him die before I graduate, before I, get married. I want him to be able to see all those things. I want him to be able to see my, his grandkids. And he was really important to me, pretty integral growing up. And as my parents were working, I would just go to my grandparents all the time, probably 4 hours a day, before school and after school. And then in the summer, I was there for like 10 hours a day. It was like the whole time my parents were at work. But not only that, like they'd get me there like an hour early, and then we'd end up staying an hour later. So it was a little longer than they were at work, and that really stuck with me. Like made it kind of hard for me to, you know, um, think about the possibility of my grandfather passing away. And when I turned 17, after I'd been praying for quite some time, um, my grandfather did pass away, and I didn't really know how to handle it. I was really angry at God. I was really upset. I thought, I spent all this time praying. I spent all this time, like focusing about it. I had devoted most of my life to God. I had, you know, despite, the average teenage rule breaking or, mischievousness, like I was following the rules of the Bible, and I was trying my hardest to be a good person and devout to God. And I just felt like, he didn't really hear me, and God wasn't really there for me at the time, and I got really angry. And that probably lasted until I was from about 17 to like right when I had just turned 19. And I was even from like 19 until like the middle of my 19, so about when I was probably about 19 and a half, that I struggled with that, and I was pretty angry. Well, I'd also had a really close friend at the time that ended up kind of leaving. Well, they didn't leave. We kind of broke ties. I was living a different lifestyle than them, and I didn't really agree with their lifestyle at the time. And truthfully, I didn't realize they probably needed me to reach out to them and help them through their tough and trying times. But I had just thought, like, oh, well, even if I had a bad life, I would never do some of these things that my friend had done. And it kind of involves, drinking alcohol and, experimenting with like nicotine and maybe smoking marijuana, like some stuff like that. And I was just like, oh, like I don't want to be a part of that. I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to associate with someone who does this. And that was like my best friend at the time. We were probably best friends for about 3 years, and it's probably the closest I'd ever been to a person in my life. And that really hit me hard too. It really hit um, all at once, pretty much. And it was really tough for me. Like it happened right after my grandfather died. I say right after, it was a couple months after. And I was already, experiencing the first depression of my life, and I didn't realize that's what was going on. Then I became even more depressed. I started getting angry at people. I started lashing out towards people. I started, like probably breaking down a lot of people in my life that were super close relationships. I was self sabotaging in my life, and I was probably at that point the most anxious or depressed I've ever really been. Because it was the first time I'd ever experienced that. Well, for the next, couple years, I would eventually go down pretty similar path that my friend did. I didn't really know what to do. I was super depressed. I'd lean on girlfriends, and a lot of times that didn't work out. Like either I expected them to do too much, or they expected me to do too much, and that's just like common things that happen when you're in high school. But I also met a friend, and that friend was like, "Hey, like my mom, she's pregnant, and we have her alcohol. Like we should try her alcohol." And I was like, "No, like I don't want to do any of that stuff. I've never really wanted to do that. I've always wanted to stay away from it." And I held that standard for a little while, and then I had just kind of got worn down one day. And I remember it was fall break, my junior year of high school, and I was like, you know what? I'm gonna go get over there. I'm gonna go hang out with them, and I'm gonna get drunk with them. And that's probably the leading to my downfall, I would say. Um, After that moment, it was every weekend I was trying to get drunk. Every other weekend I was trying to get drunk. Or around that time, like whenever I could, I was trying to go over there and get plastered. And it felt like it was the only time I could not be depressed and the only time I could not be anxious. And I just was going to church still, but I was, not going as often, not paying attention, going because my parents made me, or going because we were going to hang out afterwards, and not really focusing on, why you go to church in the first place, right? I just kind of disconnected from the church, disconnected from God, and decided to do my own thing. Well, I eventually, through just drinking a bunch of alcohol when you're depressed, I naturally went down the route of, getting more depressed, becoming dependent on the alcohol. And so I probably continued this for about a year and a half until I was about 18. I had like turned 18 for about a full year, and my whole, you know, senior year went by, and I was kind of doing that most of my senior year, and I had gotten into college, and that was very good. Like I'd still maintained some of my work ethic, my grades. Excuse me, guys. Sorry. Um, and I'd maintained a job still, but I was, wasting my money on alcohol, wasting my money on frivolous things, not saving really any of it, and I was planning on going to college. Well, I got broken up with probably 2 weeks before college, and it's one of the harder breakups of my life. I was super upset, super bitter. There was a lot of, harsh feelings at the end of it, and I just started drinking more and more with my friends. I got like the most drunk I'd ever been at this point, and I ended up throwing up everywhere. And it was not good. I hated it. I hated myself. I hated who I was. Well, the girl that broke up with me, like, told me, like, while I was talking to her, like, oh, I could change, I could fix this. And I just remember her saying a bunch of things, but I remember her namely saying, like, you're an addict and blah, 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 blah. And like, that's just what stuck out to me the most. And as soon as she said that, like, I was like, all right, I got broken up with partly because I was an addict. And there was, a lot of other things involved, but that's what stuck out with me the most. And it kind of made me hate myself, like, hated that I was an addict. I hated that I vaped all the time, that I was drinking with my friends every weekend. And so I decided, like, you know what? I'm going to put an end to that. And as soon as I got to college, I decided to go sober. And this was probably one of the more eye-opening experience for me. Right before going to college, I went to go get medication. I went to a psychiatrist, and I was like, I think I have undiagnosed ADHD. I'm gonna go get it checked out. I'm pretty sure I have anxiety too. And sure enough, they were like, yeah, we have no doubt in our mind you have anxiety. But we think you have ADHD. It's just that your anxiety is so bad that it could be some of those anxiety symptoms presenting themselves as ADHD symptoms. And I was like, okay, well, you know, they're like, we can give you anti-anxiety meds, not exactly give you ADHD meds yet, but we'll call you back and we'll have you come test for it. And I was like, all right, great. And I mainly wanted that in case I had gotten to college and I needed it to help me focus or, not procrastinate, etc. And what really ended up happening is they just gave me anti-anxiety meds. They never called me back about the ADHD test at all. And I like decided, okay, you know, I'll take these anxiety meds. Took them for about 2 weeks, and they told me it took longer than that to kick in. But I just felt like a zombie. I felt out of it. I really didn't like it. I decided I was going to, just figure it out, right? And also, if I was taking those, I couldn't drink all the time. And this was right before I quit drinking, so didn't really want to take them. Well, I ended up quitting drinking, and right when I got to college, and I didn't ever really think about this, but I become so dependent on drinking and vaping that I was having withdrawals. I'm laying in my bed. I have some like I'm waking up shaking with panic attack. I you know couldn't sleep. I would have pretty bad insomnia. I'd be lucky to get 4 hours of sleep. That would only increase the anxiety. I'd lay in bed. I couldn't really get out of bed. It'd be a hard time making myself get up and actually go do anything productive. And thankfully, I decided to go through this like right before classes started. So I had gone through almost all the withdrawals right before classes started. I had a little bit of brain fog, but that's just because it takes a little longer. And then um, I eventually beat all of it, beat the brain fog, beat the withdrawals, and got through it. But my anxiety was the worst it had ever been. Like I thought it was really bad that first time I got it. I'm getting anxiety about everything. Old trauma is resurfacing in my life. I'm rethinking everything that's happened in my life. I'm rethinking about my grandfather's death. I'm rethinking about, that friendship that got cut off. I'm rethinking about that whole relationship I had with that girl that ended up pretty bad. And it's all just seems like it's coming back to haunt me. I'm overthinking about everything. I'm thinking, oh, I'm never going to get over this. I'm never going to be able to move past it. And um, I'd actually started talking to this girl right after classes started. And this girl was like everything that I kind of had wished I was. She was very devout Christian. She'd put down all the alcohol and stuff like that. She tried it a couple times and decided, yeah, that's not for me. Like, this is really bad and I don't want to do it again. And she had like focused her life to living towards God and her career and kind of just making herself, the epitome of like finding success through your calling, right? And that's what I always strive to do. And so I kind of got really attached to her really quick. I was fresh out of a breakup, so I'm sure that didn't help. And um I ended up, like wanting to date her, and she told me like, "Hey, like we can just be friends. Like I don't really want to date you. Um I think that, like I follow God a lot more than you, and it would be kind of uneven between the two of us if I were to date you, and I feel like there'd be a lot of explanation that I have to do and a lot of teaching." And she just told me that she wasn't really for that. But then she took me to go buy a Bible and some prayer card. They call them verse cards. It's like a little pack that you carry. You write memory verses on, you memorize it, and a notebook. She took me to go get all that stuff. And from that day on, I had kind of gone to the different campus church options. I went to like two during the week. I was going to church on Sundays, and I wasn't living the greatest life by any means. But for me, being sober was, the first step. Obviously, you want to get great. You want to be a great person. You want to be a good person, and you want to cover all the iniquities, and you want to be as good as you can, right? And I had high goals for myself, but really I had to focus on getting sober first. So I got sober, and after getting sober, it really helped me focus on everything else, helped me focus on my goals. It helped me to, trust in the Lord more. I started focusing on the Lord more. I was more, I guess I was more excited to learn about God too. And I was just like more focused in general. And I think that that really propelled me out of that anxiety. It gave me something to lean on while I was really anxious, and it gave me something to, focus and put my efforts towards, knowing that, there was always going to be God who was there for me, even if it felt like no one else was. And that was something I really needed at that time, and something that really helped me. Um, Through that, I've kind of led to where I am today. There was a time in which I started drinking again, and I'd kind of gotten super overwhelmed and super upset at myself. And I really wanted to pursue bodybuilding. I tried that my whole life, but it was just not cut out in the cards for me, and I was gonna not really be able to do it. I didn't have the genetics that I wanted, and the time and the resources, and that sent me into not quite a depression, but I was just in a slump, and I leaned back into the alcohol. But I finally got out of it again. I'm about four months sober right now. Which before this, I hit about 9 months sober before I went back, and now I'm about 4 months again. And my anxiety is still kind of bad. Like I feel like my anxiety at times is worse than it used to be. I've started MMA training, as I posted a couple of videos talking about, not a whole lot, but now I just feel like I'm filled with fear all the time. Like I go in to the gym and I feel fine. I really want to be there. I'm really excited to learn. I'm really hoping that, I can make a life out of this, or a hobby, or, become some sort of competitor, and that really excites me. But when I get done, I'm just super fearful that I've got some sort of injury. I got some staph infection a couple times, and I was just super fearful that it was going to reach my brain and I was going to die, and all this stuff. And recently, I've like twinged my neck right here. I think I pinched a nerve, and so I'm having tension headaches. It's behind my eyes. It's sometimes a little hard for me to focus right now, and it's giving me a pretty bad headache. But my biggest thing is I'm not going to let that deter me. I'm not going to let that stop me from doing what I want to do. I'm going to lean into God, and despite all of that, I'm going to trust that God has my best interest in mind. For me, that's the greatest way to help my anxiety. Therapy is a great option. I think everyone should be in therapy. I think I should be in therapy, and I don't go a lot of times. I don't make time for it, but I know 100% that I should, and that really helps people. But I just wanted to tell all of you guys about my journey with mental health and anxiety, mostly, through a little bit of the depression story in there, because it's a little interwoven. But yeah, all that to say, I still struggle with anxiety, and I think I probably will my whole life. But I have to realize that, my thoughts are not who I am, and my thoughts don't dictate me. And even though that sounds a lot easier than it really is, God's going to take care of me, and God's going to help me. And that's the way that I like to think about it. I know not everyone who watches this channel is religious. A lot of my friends who support me by watching my videos, they're not. And I would just encourage you, if you really don't like religion, my first thought is to say I would question whether or not you think religion's real or not, and maybe try out a couple. And if you just come to the conclusion that you don't believe in it at all, I would say, I think you should go to therapy. I think that everyone should be in therapy. I think everyone has some sort of mental illness, but you also have to realize that most of your friends, they really do care about you, and um, they are people that you can lean on. And even if you don't normally, most of your friends will care for you and will be there for you no matter what. And that can really make the difference between a really bad anxiety patch where you feel isolated, alone, and like no one can help you, or a time when you feel like, okay, I'm heard, there's people to help me, this isn't as bad, and I feel more reassured. So, if you guys watch this whole video, I appreciate you for watching. Thank you for paying attention to my story. Hopefully, I can give some more, insight to mental health, how to help with mental health, how to mitigate certain stresses and stuff. But just want to go ahead and end the video here. If you haven't watched any of our other videos, I got a couple you should check out. They'll probably be right here, and then Other than that, thank you guys. Like and subscribe. Thank you.